When it comes to raising kids, parents have thousands of different philosophies that they use, and you see those a lot when kids play sports. For instance, maybe you're that parent that when Johnny fumbles the football, that gives away the game, and your team loses, you go up to Johnny and say, hey, that's all right. Don't worry about it. You're going to get him next time. I still trust you. Next play, next game, we're going to hand the ball off to you. Hopefully you're not a parent that's like a lot of fantasy football owners. If you get burnt once, you're done with them. Susie strikes out to end the game. Bases were loaded. You all end up losing. Susie's on the bench next game. You can't do it. Susie, you've let me down. You got to get better. Come on. Well, that happens a lot in fantasy football. We get burnt one time by a player, and we're done with them, and we move on. Well, sometimes you got to do a little bit more research to determine whether or not that's the case. And here in 2020, I've got 3 players that we should be keeping our eye on that could potentially be bouncing back, whether it be from a poor performance or an injury, that you shouldn't just give up on this season. What's going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners, and today we're going to be talking about some bounce back players for 2020, whether it be a poor performance in 2019, injury concerns, whatever we're looking at. These are guys that I don't want you just to give up on or slam the draft button on. I want you to think a little bit more about them. Before we talk about those players, though, just want to give you all a heads up. Later in this episode, I'm going to be asking everybody a question. And down in the comments below, if you answer that question correctly, we're going to put you in an entry to win a draft guide. So whoever answers the question correctly, we're going to pick one of you to give away a draft guide. So make sure you hit that like button and stick around for that question so you've got a chance to take home a 2020 Fantasy Headliners draft guide to get you ready for this season. So let's go ahead and jump into our first player to talk about today, and it's Mr. James Conner from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, James Conner is a guy that I really liked a while back. I was all on James Conner, ready to roll with him, and now I'm taking a little bit of a 180. I might not be drafting him here in 2020. I don't necessarily mind him, but I think if you have to draft him as your running back 2, expecting upside, that is where the concern comes into play. So in 2019, not that bad. Remember, he did miss some games. 10 games last year, 116 attempts, 464 yards, 34 receptions, 251 receiving yards, and 7 total touchdowns. But for this video, I'm going to be tossing out 2019. I'm not going to be ignoring it. Let's talk about it. But in my evaluation, I'm not necessarily going to use 2019 as the what if for 2020. Now, in 2019, he did average 13 carries a game prior to his injury. So he was getting a decent workload. He was the running back 9 from week 1 to week 8. And last year, too, he was at a little bit of a disadvantage. No Big Ben, no room to run. Issues with finding a lot of holes, not getting a lot of big plays, things like that. And that's why I'm kind of tossing out 2019 in this evaluation, because I don't want you to turn around and say, Kyle, this is why he can be better in 2020, because the numbers that you're using in 2019, Big Ben wasn't there, he was injured, all that good stuff, and I get it. And that's why I'm not necessarily going to use 2019 to tell you why James Conner, for me, is not a guy that I expect to bounce back in a big way like what we saw in 2018. So let's go back in time. Let's jump in our DeLorean real quick and talk about 2018 a little bit more. He did have 215 rushing attempts, which was 11th, and 12 rushing touchdowns, which was tied for 3rd. And then this is where things start to get a little murky for me, okay? His efficiency, what he can do when he touches the football. The volume has been there for him, but I'm concerned that we're going to have to get more out of him in order for him to reach any type of a ceiling. Now, his 35% of yards in 2018 came on runs of 15 or more yards. That was only 15th in the league with at least 100 attempts. So again, maybe not some of those big upside numbers that we see from guys that we expect to be running back ones. Not bad, but could be better. What about some other concerns? Some other statistics among running backs with at least 100 attempts in 2018. Yards per attempt, 4.53. That made him 26th in the NFL. His yards per contact after attempt, 2.87, 23rd in the NFL. His points per snap, not too bad, 0.39, was tied for 12th in the league. But again, that's a little bit more due to volume, right? And his points per touch, 1.04, does lead us to believe that on an efficiency level, he was a little bit better when it came to 1.04 points per touch, 11th. So I don't mind those numbers, okay? Those do help a little bit. Those are per Pro Football Focus there. Now, in the red zone and his goal line carries, this is where this becomes a little bit concerning for me again, and why I'm bringing up some of these points. Now, he did carry the ball 34 times in the red zone, and he scored 10 touchdowns. 9 of those 10 touchdowns came within the 5-yard line. But his touchdowns in the red zone and within the 5, and his 17 attempts with inside the 5, all tied for third. It's the 34 red zone carries. If he was doing such a good job of scoring while he was in the red zone, why were they not keeping him on the field a little bit more? That's a question and a concern for me. Is why didn't we have him on the field a little bit more, or give him the football more on or in those attempts? Yeah, you have a lot of weapons around him there in 2018, but he scored 10 touchdowns. That was tied for third in the league. His efficiency level there, scoring 10 touchdowns on 34 carries, is all right. But why did they keep bringing him off the field? Why weren't they giving him more carries? That's just a question. Again, I'm throwing out some number there because I want you to think about that, especially this year now that they have more players there. We'll come back to that in a second. There is a misconception as well for me when it comes to Mike Tomlin, because a lot of people say, oh, Mike Tomlin, he's a one running back guy. He never uses a committee. Has he ever had to? When he joined the Pittsburgh Steelers as their coach back in 2007, he had Willie Parker. He ran Willie Parker in 2007 and 2008. And then he went ahead and he just moved right into Rashard Mendenhall. From 2009 to 2011, Rashard Mendenhall was the guy, okay? Then in 2012, a little bit more of a committee. Mendenhall didn't play that many games. They were kind of moving some things over. And then in 2017, you get Le'Veon Bell, and you have Le'Veon Bell from 13 to 17. Tomlin's never needed to use a running back by committee, right? He's had bell cow running backs. Now, Willie Parker probably doesn't fit that, really. He didn't have the length of a career as the other two guys, but Rashard Mendenhall was the guy that could carry the ball. Le'Veon Bell was the guy that could carry the ball. They did have, like, Le'Veon Bell when he sat out, when he was injured, and when he was suspended there to begin part of the season for 4 games. What happened there? They had D'Angelo Williams, right? But again, it wasn't like they were just consistently feeding these guys, or they ever got themselves into a situation where they had to over and over and over use a running back by committee. Mike Tomlin has always had a guy. Now, he does say that he loves James Conner this season, and he sees him as that type of a player. But they have spent some draft capital on running backs the last couple of years, have they not? Benny Snell in the 4th round, Jalen Samuels in the 5th round, Anthony McFarland this year in the 4th round. So they're spending draft picks on running backs. And this is where my concern comes in with James Conner a little bit. Because he's had some injury concerns over the last couple of years. Even though Mike Tomlin is a guy that has said, yeah, I'm using my bell cow, maybe they don't necessarily see James Conner that way. Is there a reason that they spent a pick on Anthony McFarland this year? A dynamic running back, a guy that can take the ball to the house anytime he touches the football. He's a lot different than the other 2 running backs that we looked at there. And that's why I'm asking this question, if James Conner can really bounce back. Because if his efficiency levels are kind of right here in the middle, maybe a little bit more towards the bottom, he's going to have that volume. And this might not be the year for him to get all that volume. James Conner might be the starting running back. James Conner might see the majority of touches. But then you've got a guy like Benny Snell. Benny Snell's a guy that could see a little bit more time in the red zone and within inside that 5-yard line. Those short yardage situations. With Anthony McFarland and Jalen Samuels, maybe they pull James Conner off the field a little bit more and those passing play games, those ones where they're specifically designed passing plays. And they put them out on the field a little bit more just to keep James Conner fresh. That's where the question comes into play is do they pull like a Ram stunt last year with Todd Gurley where they say, hey, to begin the year, we're going to slowly work it in. You might be good on a per touch basis, but we want to be careful with you because we don't want to get you hurt. We want to save you for a playoff run. If James Conner isn't as good on a per touch basis and he has some of those efficiency concerns, he's got to have the volume. And if the volume's not there, is your running back 3? Yeah, let's roll with it. But if you're drafting him as your running back 2, hoping for some running back 1 upside, you're probably going to be a little disappointed. So let's move on from James Conner and let's talk about Odell Beckham Jr., a guy that everybody wants to hate on right now, right? Nobody wants to draft him. Everyone wants to stay away from him. But, 2019, even though it seems like that a bad year, it was mixed a little bit. 133 targets, 74 receptions, still had over 1,000 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns. But was 2019 more about missed opportunities than anything else? His 133 targets was 8th in the NFL. His 13 end zone targets were 3rd in the NFL. His 36 deep targets was 2nd in the NFL. But he had the lowest catch percentage of his career. Maybe that was just a timing thing. Him and Baker Mayfield, first year together, Baker Mayfield's first full season, actually playing, being the starter after taking over the year prior. Maybe the issue here is just that connection wasn't really there. It took a while to build that connection. Maybe they just were off a little bit. Maybe Baker Mayfield just didn't get the ball to Odell Beckham Jr. on the fly. Maybe he underthrew him some. Maybe overthrew him some. Maybe it was a timing issue. And if he gets this same amount of volume this year, and it was only a timing issue, and they're better timed this year, and they're on the same page a little bit more, is it reasonable to expect that Odell Beckham Jr. could be bouncing back this year? Well, don't forget, too, recency bias, this gets fantasy owners all the time. Last season, yeah, it was a bad season. But since 2015, Odell Beckham Jr. continues to be one of the best receivers in the NFL. He's 8th in targets in that time. He is 9th in receptions. His receiving yards, he is 6th. His 48 receiving touchdowns puts him at 3rd. His 5 seasons with 1,000 yards puts him 2nd. And don't forget that between 2017 and 2018, the dude missed 16 games. He's basically missing a full season. Can you imagine how much higher these numbers would be if he didn't miss all of those games? He played a full 16 games last year. He is said to be a lot healthier than he was last year, even though he still played in those 16 games. He was a little bit banged up at times. He was banged up the couple of seasons before that. But just like a lot of people wrote off Keenan Allen for being injury prone, don't know if we should necessarily do that with Odell Beckham Jr. at this point and say, too many injury concerns, not worth it. The dude continues to be one of the best, and when he gets the football, he is one of the best. Also, let's be real here. His biggest seasons in New York, these were the players that were around him. His Giants teammates were Eli Manning. Yeah, you can have that conversation of whether or not he is a Hall of Fame candidate. But do we think that Eli Manning is a much superior quarterback to Baker Mayfield? Right now, yeah, obviously he's better than Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield hasn't shown us anything, but from a pure talent standpoint, I mean, Eli Manning, it's not like you're going from having like an Aaron Rodgers or a Patrick Mahomes all the way down to having Mitchell Trubisky. They're a little bit closer than that. Victor Cruz and Ruben Randall were the other wide receivers that were on the field with him, and Rashad Jennings was the running back that was on the field with him. Now he's got Nick Chubb. He's got Jarvis Landry. He's got Kareem Hunt. He's got better tight end weapons. Evan Ingram was there towards the end, but, Odell Beckham Jr. was hurt that year that Evan Ingram really blew up. So his teammates are a lot better. So if we can get back to some of that efficiency that we used to see from Odell Beckham Jr., even if the volume gets spread out a little bit more, the dude's going to have a lot of one-on-one coverage. He's going to be open quite a bit, and there's going to be a lot of room to run because of how many weapons that are there. All right, now I've got a running back that we got to talk about, not necessarily because 2019 was a bad season for him, but he has an injury that's kind of overshadowing some of those numbers right now, and people are staying away from him. and that's Chris Carson of the Seattle Seahawks. Again, 2019, not a bad year. 15 games, 278 attempts, and 1,230 yards. Both of those were fifth in the NFL, and 9 total touchdowns. But again, this is why a lot of people are skipping on Chris Carson right now. It's the injury, the hip injury. Last season, Rashad Penny, a first-round pick, couldn't even get the ball away from Chris Carson. So if you're not drafting Chris Carson solely based on the injury, okay, I get it. But if you can get him as your running back 2, or if you start your draft with 3 straight running backs and get him as your running back 3, you may end up getting quite a value this year, because the injury is overshadowing some great numbers from last year, which includes 6 games of 100 rushing yards, tied for second in the NFL. His 3.63 yards after contact per attempt, 4th in the NFL. His 62 avoided tackles, that was 3rd in the NFL, and his .22 average tackles avoided per attempt, tied for 7th. Okay? So the dude, when he touches the football, he is a great runner. He's efficient, he's dynamic, he can make people miss, he can get you extra yards, he does all that great stuff. Yes, the hip is a concern, but again, if he's on the field this year, the dude's going to eat, as always. It also overshadows the fact that last year, per Pro Football Focus, his 85.2 elusiveness rating was 4th overall among running backs with at least 100 carries, and he had 317 rushing yards on plays that went 15-plus yards. That was 9th in the NFL. Again, Chris Carson, when he touches the football, the dude eats, okay? If you are worried about the injury concerns, I get it, okay? But we don't have to draft him as our running back 1 this year. We can draft him as our running back 2. All signs point to him being healthy right now. He might get hit a lot. Yep. He might go down on that hip a lot. Yep. But again, sometimes you have to take some of those concerns and some of those risks to win, okay? And with Chris Carson, that is absolutely something that could happen. Now, at the beginning of the video, I told you all that I was going to ask you a question at some point, and here you go. So comment below with what you think the answer is, or go check out, after you get done here, some of our other videos to try and find the answer. But recently, Jake talked about the Arizona Cardinals offense, particularly their running backs. So in 2019, how many half PPR fantasy points did Arizona running backs score? Answer below, and if you are right, we're going to draw a name, and we're going to give away a draft guide, okay? If you don't know the answer, it's been in a video, so you can go back and check those out. But maybe you already know the answer, or you know the video that was in. So there you go, Headliner Nation, a chance to win a draft guide for you. Hopefully you appreciated all the information in this video. Do me a favor, though, hit that like button down below, and subscribe to the channel if this is your first time here, and stick around for tons of great content all season long. Headliner Nation, appreciate you all. Hopefully you're staying safe, staying healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.